Hello, this is Dan Pro. Welcome back to my Rigify tutorial series, and we are in part 7D. So in this tutorial, what we're going to do is do an initial pass to do some cleanup of auto weighting. So in our last tutorial, we actually reparented our mesh to our armature, and we were able to hide some of these vertex groups so they're not affecting our mesh. So we don't have any vertex groups on our body mesh for any of these deformation bones for the hair, and I also hid some of our extra bones that we've added, like the breast bones, scapula, and also the buttocks bones here, just to make this initial weight painting passes a little bit easier. So we can get right in here and start cleaning up some of our auto weighting. I'm going to select my armature here, and the first thing I want to do is just turn on only this third to last layer, which is our deformation bones. And what I want to do is just hide some of these bones that are not going to be initially affecting our mesh. So those the extra deformation bones for the breast, scapula, and buttocks bones, I can just hide those. And since our body mesh doesn't need to have deformation bones for our hair, I'm going to hide those as well, and it's just going to make it a little bit easier to look at this when we're in weight paint mode. So I'll just quickly go in here, just holding shift, select all these hair lock bones in the ponytail and hide them. Alright, now that those are hidden, I can actually turn on all of my rig control layers once more. And I actually don't need all of my controls when we're in weight paint mode here. I'm going to leave my head and face main bones on so I can manipulate some of the facial controls. I don't need the secondary bones, definitely don't need the hair controls, and as I mentioned before, I do not need IK or tweaks. I prefer to do all my manipulation of my rig with FK controls while I'm weight painting. For the fingers, the main finger bones here that do all of the, when you scale it, will rotate all of those finger joints in that rig. I actually don't want those right now. I want to be able to only have these tweak bones for the fingers available, so I can just scale there, get that back, and then rehide that. Alright, I want to be able to just go joint by joint and only rotate these fingers joint by joint, and that's why I want only the tweaks on. So it's just going to make it a little bit easier. We don't have all those extra controls in there. So let's select our body mesh and just go right to weight paint mode, and we can talk about some of the settings that we're going to use for this initial pass. So in our tools, I'm going to turn my weights all the way up, and if you're changing brushes, go ahead and get to a subtract brush. I am not going to change brushes if I'm adding or subtracting. I usually just change my blend type and stick with a single brush, but right now I have my subtract brush enabled and I am in subtract mode. So auto normalize for this first pass is something that we want to have unchecked. So, and I'll explain this here in a little bit. In options, I am using this show zero weights option. So if you have that set to none, that's going to give you this blue. It's going to be very difficult to see where your low weights are. If I turn this to active, the zero weights are going to show up as black, and we know that blue is a very, very low weight, and you probably agree that that's much easier to look at. And also I want to be in wireframe, so I can type Z, or I can just go to my shading and click wireframe, and now we're in a flat shading, and we can also see the topology, which is going to really help determine where we're going to cut these weights off here. Also, I'm going to have X mirror checked on. So now that we've got all of our settings right, we can I'm going to do a simple demonstration here to show you what we're going for. So let's talk about a little bit how auto weighting works and why, in the cases of things like our hip area, our chest and shoulder area, it usually does a poor job, but in other areas it does actually a very decent job. So wherever you've got a tubular structure, like your legs and shins, thighs, upper arms, and fingers, it's actually going to, auto weights does a pretty decent job there, and we can pretty much get away with not doing too much cleanup in those areas. But where it does a poor job is when you get to areas like this where you've got multiple bones all trying to affect the same area of our mesh. So we have a right and left thigh bone, upper thigh bone, and also our hip bone here, and you can see that with def thigh.01.L selected, we've got a lot of influence all the way up almost to the chest here. So this is the deformation bone for the chest. So we've got influence all the way up there. So the reason this happens is basically auto weighting is just using kind of a raycast algorithm. So if you think of these deformation bones as kind of a light bulb or a glow stick, from the inside of the mesh it's basically trying to cast light, and that's how Blender is determining how to weight those vertices to those bones. So in the case of our hips right here, we have two bones casting light up inside this mesh, and it's competing with a relatively, these bones are, the thigh bones are relatively the same size as this deformation or this hip bone. So the hip bone's basically just losing out as far as ray casting. So that's why we get these bad deformations right off the bat here. So what we're going to do is clean this up. So I can just get that thigh bone here. You can see that we've got influence way up into the chest, like I mentioned before. And the general rule of thumb is the next bone in the chain. So I have this thigh.01.L selected. The next bone in the chain is the hip. And what I want to do is delete all this extra influence up here. I'm going to take about the halfway, I'm going to figure out the halfway point for this hip bone, which is about right here, and it's actually lines up really well with this topology line here, and I'm going to delete all that influence up past that. So I'm going to find the next bone in the chain, find the halfway point to that, and delete any influence that's above that. So I can just start painting that zero influence up here. Like I mentioned, I actually going to take this halfway point and kind of delete everything above that. And also, because I have a left side bone selected, I don't want that affecting any vertices on the right side. So I'm actually going to delete everything all the way up to the center line. Now you can leave some weights on your center line, but I've just found that, especially for the hips area, we don't need our left side bone affecting that center line. We can add that in a little bit later, but like I said, what we're going to do initially here is clean up this pass. Now we've got a lot of influence on the right buttocks from the left bone. We definitely don't want that. That's going to give us some really strange deformations, and we can just clean this area up. And once again, like I said, just follow the center line up here. Just get in here and delete some of these. You might have to zoom in here a little bit. Now I'm just going to follow this line that I deleted from the front here all the way around the back. And what I can also do, and this is another good reason why we want to see our topology here, there's three main loops here that go around the buttocks area. Now your buttocks is actually going to and your glutes are going to follow your hip area, so we actually don't need a lot of influence from our thigh bone in that area, so we can just delete this. And I'm going to use that topology to kind of show where I need to delete that out. So I've got these three loops that's kind of making this patch right here. I'm just going to delete that whole, everything above that. So this is now going to be under the control of the hip. So that's a good starting point right now. Alright, now even though we've it looks like we've deleted those weights, but these weights are actually, even though they're zero weights, they're still part of this vertex group. Now I can actually show you this by going into weight paint mode here, or actually edit mode. Oops, I'm going to deselect everything and then get out of wireframe mode so we can see everything. I'm going to select that def thigh.01.L that we just painted there, and I'm going to select all these vertices. And you can see that we've still got these vertices from the buttocks that we have zero weights on, and there's still vertices all the way up into this chest area. And they're still part of that, even though they're zero weights. So I can just show you by selecting one of these vertices way at the top here. Even though we have zero weights, this group is still part of that, and we don't want that. We want to actually clean this out, and that's kind of the whole purpose of this pass, is to clean these weights out of there. So this is another reason why we don't want to use auto normalize until we've cleaned these weights, because if we were using auto normalize, remember that Blender is going to subtract. If we subtract weights from one bone, it's going to add them to another group, so it equals 1, and we don't want that at this point. So we're going to actually normalize everything at the end, and we're also going to clean them, and which brings me to the next tool we're going to use. So we could actually delete these by hand by selecting each vertice and just clicking on X and delete all of these out, because we don't want our def thigh influencing these vertices. But that would actually take a long time, and there is a tool that will make this really quick for us. So I'm going to select all of my vertices. Again, we are in edit mode. Go to my tools panel, go down to weight tools, and there's a clean function here. So what I'm going to do is just hit that button for clean, and what I want to do is I only want to clean our vertex groups that have to do with our deformation bones. So deform pose bones, I want to select that option, and our limit is at 0, so we're just cleaning out the 0 weights. Alright, now if I deselect all of those vertices and reselect def thigh 01.L, we've cleaned all those 0 weights out, and now our edit mode, and let me just go back to weight paint so I can tab back and forth there. Now they look more in line with what we have in our weight paint. Okay, so that is what we're going to do in this initial pass, is we are going to clean up where the extensions, basically where where everything is auto weighted too far past where it should be. Then we'll go to edit mode at the end after we've cleaned those weights. We'll use the clean function, and then we're also going to normalize everything at the end rather than using that the normalize button right here to auto normalize it. So let's just start at our extremities, and once again I want to be in wireframe mode here. So that looks relatively decent. If we see how far these toes are influencing our foot, we probably don't need to go this far back. Actually, and we just go right about there. So I just know from experience that that's a pretty good spot to end the influence from the toes. Let's just keep working our way up the chain. Now with our foot, def foot selected, you can see that there's a lot of influence on these toes, and we don't want that. So I'm just going to run a line right across those toes, just delete that influence. Now I can always add a little bit back later. I just want to clean this up a little bit, and looking underneath, I don't want it to affect those as well. I'm just going to clean this up. Alright, now it's extending up into the ankle area, and that looks relatively decent. So let's select our shin bone, take a look at what that shin is influencing, and you can see that it's got influence down into the heel. Now that really doesn't make much sense to influence that, so I'm going to subtract that. Now it is going to need to affect that Achilles tendon area, so I'll leave some influence there, and I can also just add a little bit later if I need to get a good deformation. If I look at how it's extending up, it's not really going past the halfway point of the next bone in the chain. And our next deformation, shin 01.L, is not extending too far down or extending too far up. I'll just leave that as it is. And also our thigh 02, it's not going too far down and it's not going too far up. It looks like there's a... I'm just going to delete that influence from this one just so it follows this around here and is more just looks a little cleaner. And we've already done our upper thigh bone. Now let's take a look at our hip, and you can see that we're influencing pretty far down into our legs, and we really don't need that. And with our x-axis mirror, we can get this in one shot, delete all of this influence out, so we're not going too far under the buttocks. Let's take a look at how far up it's affecting. Our hip is affecting things, like I said, next bone in the chain is our spine bone. You can reselect that hip bone here, and halfway is about right there, so half the distance of this bone, and we can just delete all that influence up there and make sure we're following that around. Looks like this is the line that kind of follows that around. Alright, that's pretty decent. And we're just going to continue working our way up. So with our spine selected, that spine is having a lot of influence down here in our hips. And once again, this halfway point, we don't need it down here this far, and we'll just follow this topology line here to get this influence out of there. Let me see, this line actually goes up and around, so let me just follow that all the way around. Once again, I can add this back in, but we don't need our spine influencing our glutes. I think that's just going to make some weird deformation, so we'll get rid of that. Now let's take a look at how far it's extending up. So our next bone in the chain is chest. This is about the halfway point. I'm actually going to go a little bit lower than that halfway point because there's some good topology here that kind of defines where your rib cage is. So where the sternum comes down, you've got a rib cage that kind of pokes out here. We can actually delete all of this influence all the way down to about that line, and we don't need anything. We don't need our spine bone affecting stuff up into the armpit here. And I'm just going to follow this all the way around and delete that influence out. So this is actually pretty quick to go through this pass. Let's select our chest. Now our chest is going way down underneath, past the halfway point of our spine. So we'll just take this line right there, delete everything out of there. Now I'm not going to go through every bone in this rig. I think it would be extraneous, and I don't want to spend too much time making a very boring tutorial. If we look up, I'm going to show you, instead of going through all the fingers and all the facial bones, I will probably just stop at this point and do all this on my own time. But I'll point out some places where you might have a little trouble here. So I still got this chest. I probably can take that off of this neck area here. Maybe I'll just figure out that line. Now I know that when I was auto-weighting before with our shoulder bone, again, I don't want right side vertices affected by our left side bone, so I'm going to cut all this off here, and I'm actually going to take all the breast area off out of that group as well. Let me just pick a line here right down the center and just delete this up. So alright, that looks relatively decent. And it doesn't need to affect under our armpit so far. I'll probably just cut this off about right there. So like I said, I don't want to make a really long, boring tutorial. So I'm going to cut this off a little bit and just show you some other parts that you may have issues with here. So cut this off from the, probably don't need it all the way into that chin area there. Alright, so we're just going to continue on our way. And like I said, just using our topology as a guide, just take influence off of certain bones that don't make sense. So make sure that you're not going more than halfway past the next bone in the chain. So you're going to actually get into some areas. Another reason why I'm not going to do this is this facial area is actually going to take quite a bit. I'm actually going to go right to the forehead here. You can see that the forehead is affecting things way on the top of the skull, and that's just, it doesn't really need to do that. So we will delete all those weights out of there. And also, this is a left side bone. You don't need to influence the right side. So you can let it influence part of the center line, but don't let it get over to the right side here. And again, these are just general areas that I know that are going to cause problems. So once again, we'd want to take off this influence from these forehead bones because they don't need to go so far up here. So you can pretty much just pick a line right here, and then anything past that you can take it out. Again, you're going to run into things like the ears when you select the different ones in the ears. This is actually the front of the ear, and you don't need it pulling vertices from there. So you can just work your way through here and pretty much just using common sense delete a lot of the extra influence that's going way past where it should. So once we're all done with that pass and we've cleaned up all of our weights, again, like I said, we're going to go to edit mode. We're going to select all of our vertices, and then we're going to clean those weights to take all those zero weights out of only our deformed pose bones. And next we're going to normalize all here in one big shot. And again, we want to make sure that we're only normalizing our deformed pose bones. So if we have vertex groups for other things, we're not messing with those vertex groups, and make sure that our lock active is unchecked to get all of our vertex groups normalized, or our deforming vertex groups at least. Alright, so let's go back to weight paint mode here and take a look at what we have, and you'll notice quite a bit of difference in what our weight paint looks like. So we've got a lot stronger influence in the buttocks area for our hips, and all the way down through the center. It looks more like a pair of underwear, and that's generally what it should look like, male or female character. And we've got a lot of influence in the breast area is all being influenced by our chest now, and not so much by these other areas. So like I said, I won't go through all these bones in real time, but I hope these tips help you, and it's very important to get a better starting point here. In our next chapter, I'm going to start um, um, going joint by joint and fixing our deformation bones in a more controlled manner here. But it's very important to get through this first step and get clean up some of the oddities that auto weighting has caused for us. So until next time, good luck.